You know, I never really had a desire to write music for movies. I always call it pretty much a happy accident. I started off as a pianist as a young kid and went through music school and eventually ended up in rock and roll bands and as a session musician. And a couple of the musicians in the orchestras I used to work for said, you know, you ought to write music for TV or pictures someday. And I just never really thought about it again. And then somebody offered me a movie. It was a really silly comedy called Head Office. If you remember a movie called Airplane, it was basically the airplane of the corporate world. And I turned it down because I was terrified. I had no idea how to write a movie. And they persisted, and I eventually said yes, and I fell in love with it and been doing it ever since. You know, I never had that kind of awareness of my own career, but I think probably the biggest turn for me was probably Pretty Woman, which was 1989, 1990. And when I think about doing that movie and why Gary Marshall hired me, I still not quite sure why he hired me, because I didn't have any work out there that represented the kind of music that he wanted. So we must have had a good interview, and he just believed in me probably more than I believed in myself at the time. I work pretty strictly. I kind of start at 9 in the morning, more or less, and I work till about 6 or 7. I used to work 7 days a week and all night and all that stuff, but now at the tender age of 66, I try not to work weekends, but I end up inevitably working weekends, and I get tired after about 7. I mean, I can compose for 10 hours a day, and I'm pretty fast. I can get a lot done, but beyond that, it starts to become sort of a forced march. I prefer to start working as early as possible. I mean, before the movie's being shot. You know, more and more I find that directors are very interested in me writing music based on a script or a conversation and making demos of it that they can listen to or they can shoot to or edit to. And there's really a great advantage to that, because I find that more often than not, the music that I write before the film is being shot ends up in the movie and to a large extent plays a very big role in the movie. So I always think of a director's first experience hearing music is like when a goose is born, and they imprint on whatever live person or creature they see as being their parent. And so I like to think the director first hears my music in their movie, and that's the music they're going to stick with. If you don't really think about it in terms of images in the beginning, and you really just think about music, that's what I try and tell young composers, is just focus on music in the beginning. Write something that it has a little bit of substance to it, then turn on the movie and play your music and see if some of it works, and I bet probably a lot of it will. I make very elaborate demos, and I think most people do now. I mean, that's been part of my process. I mean, you really need to be familiar with some kind of software for electronic music to create demos of what the music's going to sound like for the director. So by the time that we get into the recording studio with a giant orchestra, the director's heard everything and we've sort of fought most of our battles. I'm extremely hands-on. I don't conduct during my recording because I like to be in the control room, and I really am very protective of that environment. I want to make sure that every time there's a playback, I have all my pre-records, the synthesizers, the chorus, the da-da-da, everything balanced properly, because if it's not balanced properly, a director can become insecure about, well, that cue doesn't sound like it used to, what's wrong? So I make sure that every time there's a playback, it sounds exactly as it's supposed to sound. Fantastic Beasts was a situation where there was a vocabulary pretty much already established by a guy named John Williams, and wrote some pretty memorable themes. So I knew that this was not a Harry Potter movie, but it was in the Harry Potter universe. So my feeling was that it still needed to be in the same vocabulary. I wanted to get rid of Hedwig's theme as quick as I could and have my own themes. I knew it was going to have to be kind of sophisticated orchestral writing with a lot of sort of magical elements, and that always involves a lot of note writing. I was really focused on the themes, and I wrote all of the themes for the movie before I saw any of the movie, and started communicating with David Yates very early on, and we went through a lot of explorations, and I think we all made the right decision before we were all done, I hope. I think it's very hard to keep things fresh over a 6 or 7 month period, which is what some of these movies are. I know I was on Fantastic Beasts, for instance, from November of 16 through September of 17. So that's a lot of time and a lot of writing. I'm not sure. I think if you've written if you have a good approach, it will survive all the audience previews and the focus groups and the reiterations and the constant scrutiny. I think what doesn't survive is probably best to just leave by the wayside. Plus, I have a couple of people around me that I think are really objective. They know my work really well, they know me really well, and of course there's a collaboration between myself and a filmmaker that is extremely important. And you know, it's a team effort. It's total collaboration. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. Well, you know, gosh, I trying to remember. I got a call from John Wells, who was the executive producer on ER, and he asked me if I wanted to do a pilot. I think he had done something before that made me think that this was going to be good, and he described some actor named George Clooney and these different people. I didn't do much TV back then. I was pretty much doing features. And I said, sure, I'll do the pilot, but I don't want to do the series. I'll do the pilot, and then I'm going to hand it off to my friend, and we did it that way. And I wrote, you know, I hate to destroy everybody's fantasies and pop their bubbles, but I wrote it in about 15 minutes. When you have a good idea, it comes very quickly, and it comes kind of in a total, complete form. So it was, you know, I knew it had to have a heart. I knew it had to feel like an emergency to some extent in the front. You know, I got lucky. Other than the original inception and the original, you know, writing of thematic material and the idea and the feeling of the movie, I think the most difficult thing is rewriting, without question. You know, rewriting is devastating. You know, you just feel like you've been kicked in the gut, and you can't imagine that somebody could be so stupid as to not understand how right you are. And for, you know, a longest period of time, that was my attitude. I'd say for the first 10 years I was doing movies, I felt I knew everything, and I didn't really care what the director had to say, which was really ridiculous. And then I realized that a lot of times, if not most of the time, a director has insights into the project that I could never have. They've been on it. They were involved with getting the thing started. They had to tell this story. It meant the world to them, and there are things about it that I need to know. And I realized that part of my resistance to rewriting had to do with just physical laziness. And I think everybody must feel that way. You just think, can I get it up again to be that enthusiastic, that passionate? Can I believe in any other idea? And the truth is, almost without fail, every time I do a rewrite and I feel like I'm in a clear kind of collaboration and communication with the director, it's better. So I've learned to just take a deep breath quickly and be thick-skinned about it, and understand that rewriting is a big part of the job. To get in this business is a very difficult thing to begin with, and I always say have a plan B. I mean, it might work out and it might not. If it's going to work out, first of all, you're going to have to stick to it and be persistent for a long time, possibly. Be good at some kind of ability to create electronic music. You know, be able to make a good sounding demo. Ally yourself with young filmmakers, student filmmakers. Pay to compose music for somebody. Do whatever you have to do just to get your music attached to some visual. But I would say more than anything, make sure that the demo you make sounds good, because the technology is so pervasive now that everybody makes a good sounding demo. They may not have any substance to it, but sometimes a director can't tell the difference. So make sure that at least the music sounds good, that it has good sounding samples, and those can be acquired fairly cheaply these days. And then just be very friendly and be willing to rewrite a whole bunch of times. Gosh, I didn't really know much about the business. I mean, when I started, I was lucky enough to have an agent, and I think you need to ally yourself with somebody you trust who can represent you in all those areas. Probably make yourself a deal with the Performing Rights Association, BMI, ASCAP, those kinds of things, CSAC. And I would protect your music. I would be careful about who you give it to. I wouldn't be afraid to actually give it to somebody and say, you can use my music for free in this movie, because they don't have any money and they can't pay you. But in a way, using your music in a film that you think is worthy is payment. And I wouldn't get too hung up on the money in the beginning. But you don't want to lose the rights to your music if at all possible. And so you probably need to at least have a conversation with an attorney if you start to get an opportunity like that. In the beginning, probably I would have been more relaxed about it. I would have known that it was somehow always going to get done, because I'm such a hyper responsible student, if you will. And when I get an assignment, I just become crazed that I have to get it done in a certain amount of time. And it's funny, when I was working with Hans Zimmer on our first Batman Begins collaboration, and we were 4 or 5 days away from the first orchestra date, and we hadn't sent anything out to any orchestrators. And I said, Hans, you're crazy. We're sitting here 4 days away from recording. We have no orchestrations. He said, what day is it? I said, it's Thursday. He said, when do we start? I said, Monday. He said, we have plenty of time. And when he said that to me, I laughed, and I realized that, composing is supposed to be fun. Even when it's difficult and you're rewriting and you want to pull your hair out, somehow find a way for it to be fun and appreciate how lucky you are to get paid to write music.